Well, good afternoon and welcome everyone to Clearing Up the TRID Rumors. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors, and today we present part one of this three-part series where we'll be covering the recent changes to the residential purchase contract, the pre-qual form, and the LSU in compliance with the TRID rules. But before we jump in today, we begin today's webinar with Nick Cantonese with AAR. He is our Vice President of Business Services and Technology. And today he's just going to give us this little mini demo of MLSConnect and how to set it up and how to update your account information. And after Nick wows us with MLSConnect, today's presenter is AAR President Jim Sexton, and Jim will be joining us in just a few minutes. So thank you very much for joining us today. And Nick, it is all yours.
Great. Let me switch my screen over so you can see what we're looking at here. What I wanted to bring to the table today was the improvements in MLSConnect. And for those of you who haven't used MLSConnect, now is a great time to get familiar with it. It's a very easy way of moving data from the MLS listing into your zip form transaction. And we've made some changes to MLSConnect. Most recent change, as of October 3rd, we added listing agent license number and the agent firm's license number to the transaction. So when you use MLSConnect, that data should now be populating into your forms. When you use MLSConnect, you really want to use the cover sheet as much as possible. If you don't, only the fields that are in the forms that you have in your transaction will move over. So later, if you add a form, you may not get the data. At the end of the month, we're adding a little bit more information. We're going to be adding your own, the buyer agent license number and your agent firm's license number. So that means for the TRID requirements that came out on October 3rd, you'll be getting all four pieces of data that are now required on that residential purchase contract for your license number and your firm's license number. If you're not familiar with MLSConnect, you'll want to go to the AAR online website. Once you log in and go to the zip form page, you'll find a section called How to Use MLSConnect with Zip Form. Underneath is a quick tips for using MLSConnect. So even if you've never used MLSConnect before, this will take you through the steps that you'll need to learn how. And it's actually very simple. When you click on that link, it'll take you to a blog page that was created some time back, but all the information is still very relevant. And it tells you how to use MLSConnect. It starts with your MLS profile. In your Flex system, and I know that most MLSs in the state are on the Flex system these days. Those of you who are not, some slightly different instructions, but we're going to address the Flex system since it's the predominant system throughout the state. You first have to go into your preferences and into your profile. There you'll find a setting called RETS settings. It'll ask you to put in a RETS password. Now this password is not going to take the place of your password for your MLS. This is simply for MLSConnect. So you can make it actually very simple. I like to use something like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 because it's something that's easy, simple to remember, and it doesn't have to be complicated because it's not really protecting anything of value. Once you set your RET setting, then in zip form, from your transaction, you'll find that there's an MLSConnect button. When you click on that, a window will open where you'll put in your MLS user ID, and that's the user ID for your MLS, the password, which is the one you just created, the RETS password, not your normal password for your MLS. Then under Find Property, you'll make sure that you click on Residential, put in the listing ID number, click Find, and that will then populate so you can verify the address. You click Import and Close. That's it. It's just that simple. When you do that, all of your information will come over. Now, if you're not using MLSConnect and you still need to get your license numbers for your transaction, a quick way to do this, if you're not comfortable with learning MLS right away, you can get your license numbers from azre.gov. You can go to Search an Individual, or you can go to AARonline.com. Once you log in, you'll be able to go to My Account and find that information as well. At azre.gov, you'll click on Online Services. You'll select Public Database, and under Licensing, you'll search for a salesperson to view license information. The easiest way to look at yourself is by your name, and click Continue. That'll take you directly to your records and show you your license information. And if you click on your broker's name, it'll show you the broker's firm's information. At AARonline.com, you will log in, of course, to make sure the system recognizes you. And once you do, you'll go to My Account. This is one of the changes that we made recently to help accommodate members to find their license information. Under My Account, you'll now see two sections. You want to make sure that, of course, your name appears under Your Name Is. You'll see your NRDS number, and then you'll see your license number. Below that, you'll then see your firm information and license number as well. If your information is wrong on AARonline.com, contact your local association. They make the changes for all records within our membership system. Once they make the necessary changes, the corrected information will automatically populate into AARonline.com. If you have any questions, of course, please give us a call or send us an email at Business Services support at AARonline.com, or call us toll-free at 866-833-7357. And that's it for my part.
Well, it seems fairly simple, Nick, that they just need to make sure, that they have their NERDS number, they're able to log in and correct their information. Now, what if they need to update their information? Repeat that one more time. Where do they need to go if their information is out of date?
All information is accessible. All information has to be updated at the local association. So if the information is wrong or it doesn't appear, contact your local association. When they put it into their system, the data then populates to NAR and then to us. So within about 15 minutes, quite honestly, we get that information updated in our system. So if you have any questions on how this works, give us a call, please. But to get it corrected, your local association has to make the changes within the system.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And folks, we are going to switch everything back over, so you should be seeing my screen in a couple seconds. And we're going to switch that back over. And while we're waiting to do that, we have a couple of true and false questions that we're going to put up on the screen. So if you will answer them for us in the question box feature. So true or false? Any change to the closing disclosure will necessitate a new 3-day waiting period. True or false? Oh, Jim, looks like we're going to need to cover this one a little bit. I've got 50-50 on true and false, and one I have no idea. So the answer is false. False. So Jim will be covering that. All right, so the next question is true or false? The agents need and will always receive a copy of the closing disclosure. True or false? It looks like we're about 90-10 on this one. And the answer is false. Does everybody agree?
Are we 90-10 false or 90-10
This one's
true?
90-10 false.
All right.
So that's good. That tells me you got a bunch of awesome people. All right, so we're going to be continuing on just so we can get started here. So today's key presenter is current AAR President Jim Sexton, and Jim brings almost 35 years of real estate and leadership experience to us, having served on local, state, and national leadership and way too many committees to mention, as well as the designated broker of Realty One Group. Jim sets the bar for both ethics and integrity in our industry. Jim is a 3-time Realtor of the Year recipient, as well as a GRI designee, a CRB, and a certified ethics instructor. Jim will be speaking with us today for about 40-45 minutes, followed by questions and answers. And please feel free to ask your questions in the question box feature. I know some of you also emailed your questions earlier, and we totally appreciate that. And as always, today's webinar will be recorded and will be available on our website, hopefully by the end of the week. So Jim, I'm going to turn this over to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Callie, and thank you, Nick, for going over MLSConnect. Obviously, AAR has been working with ZipLogic to update those changes, and we expect those changes to be made by, I think, next Tuesday or Wednesday? Or next Wednesday, I guess. So I'm looking forward to that. And the benefit there, of course, is our MLSConnect works throughout the state. Even though it has an MLS in its name, it is a program that is put on by AAR. So thank you so much for working with that and hopefully simplifying getting the agent's license number as well as their company license number online. Since Nick is still here, can I ask him a question?
Absolutely.
I don't know why people think I ask a lot of questions, Nick. But you know, the other part as a broker that occasionally happens is agents might have the wrong number that you asked, but what if they change companies? How long does it take to change from company A to company B and have it updated in MLSConnect? Do you know that?
Well, the answer is as quickly as their local gets the information. So it's up to the agent, of course, to make sure that the local's informed as soon as a change is made. And once they put it into their system, it populates then to NAR and to AAR within minutes. So it's as fast as the agent updates the local.
Okay, great.
And just to intercede real quick, that's any information, whether it's a name change, an email address, a mailing address, any change needs to go through the local association.
Correct.
Great, good to know. There's the answer to your question, Jim.
Great, thank you.
Thank
Appreciate
you.
it. Okay, well, let's take those two true-false questions. If everyone didn't get 100% on there, let's go back and make sure that those get answered. So the first one is the agents need and will always receive a copy of the closing disclosure, and the answer is false. And part of that is, you know, what is the closing disclosures? The closing disclosure obviously is only between typically the borrower and the lender. And so the question becomes, if I'm the listing agent, am I going to get it or not? Last week I had the opportunity to interview the real estate commissioner and do some promo and get some questions answered about what's going to be replacing the HUD-1 going forward. And Commissioner is in the process of announcing that the settlement statement will be the new document replacing the HUD-1. And the settlement statement will have the pluses and minuses, you know, the debits and credits of a transaction that's spelled out there. There are a couple of other changes or questions that still need to be clarified there, and one of the changes has to do with will the title companies be releasing side-only settlement statements, or will they have combo statements? And by that I mean, if I have the buyer, am I only going to see the buyer settlement statement, or am I going to see the combo, which will have both the buyer and seller charges and debits on there? So the title company is still working on that answer, and to real estate commissioner's credit, she has been facilitating some discussions, not just with the real estate industry, but also with mortgage and title. So we do hope to have that clarified pretty quickly. So the agents will need and will always receive a copy of the closing disclosure. Again, we'll be seeing a settlement statement, and that's what's going in our broker file. And the lenders, the continued feedback from the lenders are going to be keeping that closing disclosure close to their vest. They're pretty adamant that they'll only be releasing the closing disclosure, their closing disclosure, to their buyer, to their borrower. And so if an agent could get it, if the buyer decides to give it to their agent, they could give it to them. However, some folks think that there's privacy information on there, and I always scratch my head and wonder, you mean like loan amount? Is the loan amount privacy information? Well, what happens when it gets recorded? Because I think the affidavit and a few things show you what the amount is that you're borrowing. Perhaps the APR is what's considered private information. But I think those could be redacted, but I'm sorry, topic for a different day. Next question was, any change to the closing disclosure will necessitate a 3-day waiting period. We had the opportunity of hearing the CFPB director specifically addressed this in Washington, D.C. And of course, there's only 3 instances in which there'll be a 3-day waiting period. And that is if the APR goes up by more than 1/8% on a fixed product, or 1/4% on an adjustable product. If you go from FHA to conventional, that's going to have a 3-day waiting period. And if the prepayment penalty gets added, that'll have a 3-day waiting period. But a number of items can happen at the end of a transaction that will require a new closing disclosure. However, it won't be a closing disclosure with a waiting period. So that's why the answer to that question is false. Hopefully we're not getting any feedback or follow-up questions to those questions, which will, of course, allow me then to go on. And we'll touch on the purchase contract. I just want to go quickly on the purchase contract. I would assume that most have been to a contract or two. My experience, as Callie indicated, as the broker for Realty One Group, asking my agents of what's going on with TRID and what are some of the TRID issues that are coming up, we're certainly in the transition period. I haven't had the opportunity to interview any agent or any lender that has said, geez, I've closed, a dozen TRID transactions so far, since we are basically just beyond the probable notice of intent period for the early transactions. Not surprisingly, we haven't had too many to close. So if we're taking a look at our PowerPoint, you'll see that the page 1, we're still reminding borrowers to track the time requirements and to get things done in a timely manner. When we take a look at section 2A, the pre-qual form, an AAR pre-qual form is attached and incorporated herein by reference. Let's touch on that because I think we've already received a question or two about that. And I have received questions as well. Questions like, well, I've got an old pre-qual form, and does an old pre-qual form go with the new purchase contract? And the answer to that question is maybe. The ideal situation is a new pre-qual and a new contract. That makes the most sense. They match. They were designed together. They were designed to work together. If you're using an old pre-qual form, you got a couple of things that aren't addressed. Specifically, questions like, is there a prepayment penalty? Is it fixed or adjustable? Some of the wording is different, and it would be interesting because lenders asked us to change the language so it was softer, more CFPB compliant. And so the old pre-qual form probably goes too far in requiring documentation, where the new form basically just says what I've received, as opposed to the fact that I've requested this, that, and the other thing. The other question that we get on it is, that we've gotten on this already, is out-of-state lenders, and whether out-of-state lenders are interested in filling out an AAR form. Most are not interested in that, but understand that the pre-qual form can be filled in, if you will, by the buyer, or it can be used. I tell my agents, just use it as a cover sheet. So if you get a document from an out-of-state lender and it shows that the buyer is going to be able to qualify for this amount, this loan amount at this interest rate, and answers the basic questions, then just use the new pre-qual form as your cover sheet. Have the buyer sign it and submit it, and that certainly will comply. That, in my opinion, is a better pre-qual than lines 1 to 4 filled out with the buyer signing, saying, I haven't met with the lender yet. It just, it shows that the buyer is interested. It shows that the buyer, is motivated and has taken care of the at least the initial step. So that would be my recommendation. If concerning the pre-qual form. Next, looking at the loan status update. The loan status update is now within 10 days. Prior contract said 5. It does push it out a little bit. This becomes a curable event. We'll talk about curable events when we get into the critical date list. But it does give the seller the opportunity to see if the buyer is making progress in the loan application. So that's that's what happens with that situation. The next is the loan contingency, and although we're talking about this early on in the transaction concerning the changes. This is obviously what happens just before consummation or close of escrow, and that is, has the buyer signed the loan docs in a timely manner. The options are the same. The seller wants to get either notice that the loan docs have been signed. They want to find out if the buyer is, is there an unfulfilled loan contingency that's going to get issued, or has the the loan docs been delivered to title, and we're just waiting on the clock to tick for the buyer to be able to sign the document. So those are the three things. Again, as a broker, I haven't had specific discussions and new scenarios with this and with this paragraph. Again, the Roman numeral, the two in parens, line 58 is the major change, and has the what if or the if then clause that's in there. So I think that's the one that people will be most concerned with, as we get another 20 days or so down the road. Loan application. Again, now we're calling for the loan application within 3 days of contract acceptance. Again, understand all days references in the purchase contract are going to be calendar days, and that and we define what the loan application is. It has the 6 items that the CFPB has defined, namely the buyer's name, their income, their social security number, the address of the property, the sales price, and the mortgage loan amount sought, and that they grant the lender permission to pull the tri-merge credit report. Basically, we're looking to get the loan started, get the loan process started, and this is an important step in getting that done. This is the loan application. Had a number of questions about this. Again, a transitional type question, that the buyer had met with the lender at the end of September, had got the pre-qual form done, and therefore they want the contract on the old. They want the contract on the old contract as opposed to the TRID contract. And to me, it's just a head scratcher. You would think that lenders would be aware of the definition of a loan application. However, as the president of AAR, I figured that all realtors would be familiar with the TRID changes and the necessity to make the changes. So it's not just some of the folks in our industry that are still struggling with keeping up to speed on some of these changes that took place. But anyway, this section 2F is specific and now defines not only the time period that the loan app needs to be filled out, but also the fact that we're doing this, everything that is incumbent to have a loan application.
Would you like a couple questions?
Sure, let's do questions.
All right, first question. If the buyer does not complete the loan application within 3 days as stated in the contract, are they in breach, and is a cure notice appropriate?
The answer to that is, well, first of all, they're not going to be in breach because there's no such thing as a breach. They're all potential breaches, and it's not going to be a breach until the cure period passes. So the no loan app within 3 days is certainly a curable event. And again, when we get to the critical date list, which I think, did you email out to everybody?
Yep, everybody should have received it.
And this is a form that's on AAR. It's not on zip forms, although I think the Risk Management Committee will be looking at adding it to zip forms. And when I saw this, it became so helpful in teaching a class to be able to go through the process and to know where the curable events are, and to just be able to keep track of an escrow. Martha Apple, our risk management chair this year, and also the designated broker for Coldwell Banker, designed this form a number of years ago and allowed AAR to use it. And again, I just think it's valuable. We'll go over it when we get to it in just a little bit. Go ahead.
Okay, next question. This goes back to what you said previously. Some of the out-of-state lenders have stated that their pre-qual form doesn't state the language that they need to conform to, I think it's supposed to be CFPB rules. Any feedback on that?
I've had a discussion with a couple of lenders talking about how the AAR purchase contract is non-compliant with CFPB, or the language is non-compliant. And when I get those questions, by the way, I'm not a good person to be asking questions to. Nor do
Never mind.
Answer my questions. But when they ask me the question, I ask for the specific part that they're referencing. And most times I'm going to be able to say, well, no, that is compliant because of this or because of that. And if I'm not able to answer it, of course, then I forward it to Scott Drucker, AAR's legal counsel, and say, okay, what's the rest of the story on this part? And, you know, I'm very proud of our contract revisions and the time and effort and the manpower that went into the thought process, as well as the research that we did to make sure that our forms are, they might be leading edge CFPB compliant, but they are definitely CFPB compliant. So to say that the language doesn't meet it is, in my opinion, either a misunderstanding on their part or they misread, you know, the specific language.
Right.
Because we and the AAR, we have done considerable research to make sure that we're not putting members in harm's way when we're using the forms in their boilerplate as they're set up in the boilerplate.
Absolutely. And can you touch on the estimate of value of premises within 3 days?
Yeah, the estimate of value is CFPB speak for sales price or contract price. One of my suggestions in the committee is, why are we saying that? And again, just to show you the nth degree that we went to, we used the same language that came out of the CFPB documents. And so we didn't change it, even though Jim, the president, said, no, let's say sales price so it's less confusing. You know, Scott and the committee as a whole said, no, we're going to stick with the CFPB language. That's what they say. If they meant sales price, they probably would have said sales price, but no. But yeah. So anyway, that's how we got there. Estimate of what is it? I'm sorry, what is it?
Estimate of value of the premises.
Yeah, estimate of value is the sales price.
Okay.
I know.
All right, last question and then we're moving on.
Sure.
Should a seller agent be contacting the buyer's lender to see if the loan app has been submitted in order to see if there's a potential breach?
Should the
seller's agent be contacting the buyer's lender?
You know, I think that the seller's agent is going to be an active reviewer, if you will, of the loan process. And as a matter of fact, one of the things that I've already heard, and which I think is a good idea, is in the event there's a multiple offer scenario and transactions are calling for financing, I wouldn't be surprised if the listing agent isn't going to be contacting the lenders prior to presenting the offer to see how cooperative the lender is going to be. To the extent that it's an out-of-state lender and I don't use your forms, I'm not going to respond to your request, so this is all privacy information, I think it's going to put buyers at a disadvantage in having their offer considered. So should they? Yes. Will they? I expect listing agents will be involved. And I hope that part of the decision-making process for the buyer/borrower is going to be a responsive lender, not just responsive to the buyer's questions, but also keeping the agents informed of the process. Again, the listing agent is not asking for any privacy information. I'm not saying call me up and say what's the FICO score, stuff like that. I get that there's private information. I just want to know where are we in the timeline, and is the buyer cooperating? Is the buyer making a diligent, good faith effort? And can you document it? Those I think are appropriate questions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Where are we now? We're on 2G?
2G.
2G talks about the intent to proceed. Very important part. Obviously, we've set this up. So it's 10 days after receipt of the loan estimate. The loan estimate comes out as a result of the loan application, and then how does it get delivered? You have all of those things. Those are for, TRID classes or know before you owe classes, not so much what we're doing here. Understand that part is a change. It's focused on the intent to proceed. And the buyer at this point needs to have picked a winner. Who's the lender that I'm going to go with? The reason that that's important is that now the lender can start to require buyers to provide documentation. Now they can order the appraisal, and now they can pay for things like the appraisal. And so this is that's the important part of 2G. The 8R and the 9A is MLSConnect. That's what Nick went over. Additionally, when I was interviewing the commissioner last week, she was going over the fact that azre.gov also has this information available, and so you can either look it up or you can do it the simple way that that Nick described just a few minutes ago. So that's kind of the highlights of where we are with the purchase contract and the changes to the purchase contract. Next, we get into the critical date list. And again, I look to this to be kind of an escrow checklist going forward. Let's get the people's names on here. Let's plug it out. Let's do the title company, the contact names, et cetera, et cetera. And then you see as you get down to the bottom half of page 1 and throughout page 2, you actually have all the different items that could be cured throughout a transaction. But these are also part of the steps that need to be accomplished throughout the transaction. So all those little CNs that are in the left-hand corner, those are all potential cure notice items. Don't have to issue this many cure, but understand when you look at all these, you see all the different steps that need to be completed. One of the takeaways that we had from our most recent industry partners conference in working through this was the fact that title scratched in their head saying, I didn't realize real estate agents had to go through all this book. Or, mortgage companies saying, I didn't realize that, the realtors were doing all these items. And it's sort of, everybody's got a lot to do and a lot that's specifically assigned to their, on their plate. And so this just kind of documents everything that is going on as we get through this. And it's also, very handy. Again, you can go to AAR online. You can search critical date list. This will pop up, and you can use this. As a company form, or you can certainly use this to help you go through the process. So let me just highlight a couple of these items because I think we'll get questions on this. I already got the question about the number 3 actions. Number 3 says buyer to provide lender with loan application. There you have the within 3 days of contract acceptance, and CN, so it can be a curable. You drop down to 6 and 7, and specifically 7, buyer to receive the loan estimate. Again, that's a trigger based on number 3, which is when did you do the loan application. The loan estimate, we don't have the number of days on there because you got to tell me how it's delivered, and based on how it's delivered, I can tell you what the time period is for that. There is a time period on number 10, and this is also a curable event, buyer to supply the LSU within 10 days after contract acceptance. And so that's why we've got 10 days after contract acceptance, irrespective of how it got delivered. The contract, as far as the LE is concerned, the LSU, we're still loan status update, loan estimate, sorry, acronyms. The LSU is tied to contract acceptance. We go to the next page.
And Jim, before going on, can you just define contract acceptance? Some people seem to think that that's when, you're just opening escrow and getting things started. When is actual contract acceptance?
Thank you. Another good question. And the answer to that is going to be when did the contract get signed? So if we're going typical contract, buyer to seller, seller accepts it and then delivers the contract back to the buy side by the buyer broker. That becomes the acceptance. We're on the clock. That's a trigger, and that starts the time periods within the purchase contract. In the event it's dual agency, sorry to complicate things, but dual agency doesn't need to be delivered back to the buy side. I mean, it does practically, but it doesn't. I mean, if it's the next day, but you're a dual agent, technically the contract has been accepted when either side of it received it for the first time. Okay, so yeah, it's all about acceptance and delivery. And delivery is to the side that's waiting anxiously on their phone, waiting for the email to come back saying the contract has been accepted.
And what if there's a counter?
Again, the counter is going to push that back because it's going to be the final meeting of the minds. Both sides have signed the same document indicating acceptance, and now we're getting it back to the originator. So if you originated to me a change in price, and now I've accepted the price, then I'll send it back to you. And now once you get it, that's going to be contract acceptance.
Thank you.
Okay, item 18 on the critical date list is going to be intent to proceed, again, a curable event. You'll take a look at item 19 is also a curable event, and you drop down to 26A, B, and C. All of those are curable events, which we covered when we were going through the contract. So you can see that there's a number of items now. I mean, not that they're new, just that they're just the form has been updated to be TRID compliant and to be current with the changes as the contract got changed. You have everything else that needs to be taken care of as well. That obviously is covered on the critical date list also. Are you caught up with your questions, or did I confuse everybody with the critical date list?
I have a couple more.
Go ahead.
How does the seller's agent find out if the LE has been delivered? The buyer's agent may not know.
Right. You know, again, let's work on expectations and on managing consumer expectations. I think the buyer broker needs to make sure that that they stress the importance of the buyer and the buyer's lender keeping the buyer broker informed. And assuming that happens, this will be great. I do think that is happening in the field. I mean, all of a sudden, it's interesting as you look at, okay, here we are, a little more than 2 weeks into TRID, and has there been a dramatic change in the marketplace? Some lenders say, you know, TRID, come on, this is like Y2K stuff. There's no impact. This is more noise than actual substantive changes. There are substantive changes. The changes are more dramatically affecting the lender side of the equation than our side, than the realtor side. However, from the realtor side perspective, we need to be informed and prepared and able to process. In other words, understand what the what the time periods are now, and what they are, and what everybody's going to have to live with. So how is the listing agent going to communicate to the lender? Once the lender starts to figure out that they can be cured, how many times did I just give you on that critical date list? A half a dozen or more times, based on failure to perform stuff. That sounds like the deal is going south. I think lenders are going to want to keep deals heading in a positive direction, as opposed to losing control of the deals or actually having the deal cancel because of lender out of touch, or lender not available, or lender non-responsive.
Mm-hmm. Great. And Bob, just to answer your question, the critical date list is currently available on AAR's website at aaronline.com. Just type in critical date list. Risk Management Committee is currently working. We're hoping maybe to see it on zip forms in maybe January-ish.
Yep.
Jim is shaking his head. Nick, not so much. So currently it's available online. Also, I did send it out via email this morning to everybody who registered for today's webinar. If you didn't receive it, send me a quick email and I'd be happy to send it over to you again. All right, pre-qual form.
Let's take a look at it. Again, lines 1 through 5. If the buyer hasn't consulted with the lender, they can just check box 3 and sign it. If I'm the listing agent, I'm going to think this buyer isn't really ready to buy, but I'm going to have the conversation, or I've had the conversation with my seller. In fact, I've seen some agents that are putting in MLS comments that they're looking for a pre-qual signed by the loan officer as well as signed by the buyer. In other words, we go all the way down to line 40 and 42, and they want to have the buyer to have met with the lender prior to submitting a contract. Now, that's not the buyer's, that's not the listing agent's directive. That's instruction from the seller that they're passing on to the buy side. So I think that this is a process now. The process has been changed. I think it's appropriate for the listing agent to be aware how far along the buyer is in the process, and if they're just starting, they may or may not be, the buyer may or may not experience some problems and they may find out things that they weren't expecting. And so let's get it started with more than just hey, I'm going to see a lender, within 3 days, which is basically what the default language would be. The lender indicates that they've consulted with the buyer. That's the 6. If we take a look at interest rate not to exceed, I love this line. The reason I love the line is because the 3 boxes that are included on there, we included those 3 boxes there because it was the only white space we could find on the form. Because it had nothing to do with the interest rate not to exceed, X percentage. But we do want to know if it's a fixed interest rate, is it going to be adjustable, and is there a prepayment penalty? Again, those are all TRID questions, and we did find a space to just smooth it right in there. Initial document received used to say requested. Lenders can't say requested at this point because they're not taking a loan out. They haven't received the intent to proceed, and therefore that got softened. We tried to put requested in there, and one of the main attorneys out of Washington D.C. said, no, that's a bad idea. Don't do that. And then, of course, we added some of the license number information for the lender, both state as well as national as well.
So a couple questions
Sure.
Before we move on to the LSU. Going back to those 3 little boxes, they don't really apply if it's a cash transaction.
The pre-qual, you're not going to be doing a pre-qual. You're going to do a source of funds, right. Proof of funds, and so and that's the other part when we're I've been asked questions. Hey, I got a cash deal. Do I have to use the new TRID contract on a cash deal? It's like, do you have to? No, but why not? I mean, what? I don't know what you lose because as long as you've got the source of funds. Again, we didn't change that language. So as long as you have that, it's gonna move accordingly. It's going to be it's not going to harm the transaction. Let's leave it that way. But no, you don't need it. If you're doing cash, you don't need a pre-qual form. You don't need an LSU form.
So basically, and correct me, of course, nothing's really changed if it's a cash transaction. The timelines are all the same. You're still going in the same direction.
Correct. The cash transaction, all the changes that were made were for TRID reasons. Everything was all about TRID, TILA, RESPA, integrated disclosure. I guess I should have started there. What is this seminar about? Those changes. That happened on October 3rd, and so cash didn't get affected, and therefore you don't need a pre-qual, you don't need a loan status update.
Great. Well, thank you. And no, Clark, Bitcoins are not accepted, not yet. What if the buyer changes the initial offer from cash to partial financing?
Okay. The changes language in the purchase contract didn't change. Wait, how many negatives is that?
You're the president.
And the changes language, of course, allows the buyer to make any changes to the loan program that they're dealing with, as long as it doesn't affect their ability to qualify, delay closing, or cost the seller more money. And so the fact that you're going from cash to partial financing could delay closing. In the event that it does, if the change was made without the seller's permission, without the seller's signing off on it, then earnest money may be at risk. And so can the buyer change? Yes. Are there risks if the buyer changes? Yes. Could it cost them their earnest money? Possibly. It all depends on, did the seller approve? Did it get presented? And and does everybody understand what's going on? And was it done in a timely manner?
I'm going back to the cash sale. Yes, Jesse, on line 53 of the contract, it says if this is an all cash sale, go to section 3. So
jump right by it. Yep. You don't have to worry about the TRID stuff if cash is still king for your transaction.
Okay. On carrybacks, new contract?
Carrybacks, new contract. Well, the seller financing changes were for Dodd-Frank, for TRID compliance, were actually done last year, January of 14, where we split our what used to be an assumption seller carryback addendum from 1 form to 4 forms, and so now we have an assumption, which is still possible, highly unlikely. I can't remember the last time I've seen a pure assumption. And then we've got the 3 seller financing forms. The 1 non-consumer credit, which is basically raw land or commercial, or an investor type financing, and then we've got the seller financing for 1 in 12 months or 3 or fewer or 3 or fewer in a 12-month period. Again, I've seen very few seller financing for 3 because basically you still have to qualify the person as if you're a lender, and a few SFAs, seller financing for 1 or fewer in a 12-month period, and that seems to be kind of once we got on the right form, it seemed to be kind of a non-issue going forward. So that part's still happening.
Okay, all right, so we're going to take a quick stretch break. Everybody stand up and stretch a little bit. We got a couple true-false questions coming up. We got a couple hundred people on the webinar today, and I just want to say thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it so much. So true or false? TRID does not apply to hard money lenders. True or false? TRID does not apply to hard money lenders. Ooh, we're about 50-50, half true. Oh, no idea. That is the most honest answer. Yeah, 50-50, half true, half false. Jim, you want to answer?
Yeah, it's either true or false. I agree. I agree. Technically, it's false. But as far as we're talking about technically, the question becomes, how fluid is a hard money lender? And by that I mean, if it's a hard money lender with one legal entity and they make more than 5 transactions in a year, then they're definitely, then it is a TRID transaction. In the event they're fluid enough so they can come up with 100 LLCs in which they're functioning as a lender, I guess it's possible. Because I'm still getting solicitations from hard money lenders that they can fund tomorrow on a hard money deal, and it's like, well, how can that be done? And that, so in brainstorming, I guess that's a way to get done. Otherwise, they're just ignoring the law, which could get expensive. And so if they think hard money is expensive, wait till they get some of those hard money fines, and they'll find out what expensive really can be.
I think we should bring this question back up in November.
Yeah, we'll see if they're still around and how they think they can do their workaround.
All right, next true or false question. Buyers can submit a loan application before identifying a property. True or false? Nope, not yet, Jim. Okay, folks, true or false? Buyers can submit a loan application before identifying a property. Okay, it looks like it's about 75 true, 25% false. And the answer is actually, Jim, you're up.
Right. Well, the answer is false, except again, are we using the same language that lenders use? Because lenders still want to say that they've pre-approved a buyer, or that they're all set to go with the buyer, and that and the buyer is clear to closing, or whatever their term is going to be. Technically, according to TRID, you can't do a loan application until you find a property. When we went back to the definition, premises address, property address is one of the items that you need before you can do a loan application. So if we're talking about the definition of loan application, according to CFPB, we need a property address before we can submit a loan application. Now, can a buyer walk in to a lender and say, I understand TRID and all this other stuff. You've done my last 3 deals. You're the lender that I'm going to choose. Here's my information. Let me fill out this. Let me fill out this. And let me leave property address TBD, to be determined. And can you run that for me? And is that going to qualify as a loan application? Some lenders will probably call it a loan application, except without an address. If this was all done back in September, last month, that wouldn't have complied to a non-TRID deal, because if the transaction didn't get accepted or the contract didn't get delivered or the address wasn't determined until after October 3rd, then it would be a TRID deal. So the trick with any true-false question is that can you create a scenario where maybe it's not always false? And so that's what I did. Sorry.
That's okay. All right, moving on. Let's talk loan status updates.
Sure. So the LSU got updated as well. We talk about some of the page 1 changes. They're going to mirror the pre-qual form. We're going to plug in, again, the lender's Arizona license number as well as national number. We're going to tell them that it's 10 days, not 5 days. We added in close of escrow date. It's always fun to introduce a concept foreign to most lenders, close of escrow date, sorry. This is a realtor webinar, right? Close of escrow date, we did plug in there. The prior version used to say, pretty please get us the loan docs prior to, it said closing loan docs delivery date. And so we've now modified that to be close of escrow date. It's interesting that we're calling it close of escrow date. They're probably going to look at it and they're going to be more concerned with consummation date. And, we'll do the consummation, of course, when can the loan docs be signed. We want to make sure that they're aware of when we're expecting this deal to close. And then the other, line 39 had a lot of discussion on that. Used to say intends to proceed. It intends to proceed with the above reference lender. My story is that the CFPB liked our language so well, they made it a term of art, and they created the intent to proceed as the earmark of, okay, this is they picked the winner. We didn't want to use the same language on line 39, so we softened it to commits to work, but it's not really the intent to proceed, and the intent to proceed comes up on the second page of the LSU. As we take a look at the second page, 42 is the loan app that we talked about. 44 is they've sent the loan estimate. Of course, there's three ways to deliver the loan estimate, either in person, by mail, or electronically. And then 45 says, and so 44 is just it's been sent. What we're tracking is on 45 and 46 is have you received an intent to proceed. So 44 doesn't really say has it been received by the borrower. It just says has it been sent, and that allows us to get to stay current on what's going on with the transaction. As we drop down to 55 through 58, the appraisal received. Premises as appraised for at least the purchase price, closing disclosure provided, closing disclosure received. We've drilled this one down to received because, again, they've got to be received 3 days prior before loan docs can be signed. And so 58 is going to be an item that we're going to be looking at if we get to closing, or if we're on the week before closing and we're trying to figure out when can we get this deal closed? When can the buyer sign loan docs in order to get the transaction closed? If we look at the 63 and 64, the lender has ordered the closing loan docs and the instructions and received the closing loan docs from all parties. The one thing that I've discovered in teaching these classes and interviewing different lenders is all of a sudden I'm becoming an expert, if you will, on how a lender's company is broken up. It used to be, and I guess there's some similarities as far as a realtor. A realtor on a team, might have a listing agent, might have buyer side agents, might have transaction coordinators, and they have different people with different functions. Now that I've been talking to more and more lenders, I think it's incumbent on us to ask the lender, what part of the transaction do you deal with? Typically, the people that we're talking to are going to be LOs, they're going to be loan officers. And the loan officer is going to start the application. They're going to meet with the buyer initially, they're going to get the information that we talked about on the purchase contract, and they're going to begin to compile the borrower's information, the buyer's information. And then, depending on the size of the company, they're going to turn it over to their compliance department. And the compliance department is going to look at what has been assembled, what else am I going to need, let's get some costs involved, and they're the ones that are actually going to fill out the LE, the loan estimate. And this is the shopping piece of paper, if you will, that the buyer has in order to compare a loan from lender A from lender B, C, or D. And so that gets done by a different person. And so then, well, wait, where am I going to get my LSU? Again, the LE is out of compliance. Is the LSU going to come from compliance, or is it going to come from, the loan officer? The pre-qual form, I think, is going to come from the loan officer in most instances. So it stands to reason that the LSU will come from the loan officer as well. But now they're not going to know what all the steps are. They're going to call their compliance department and ask the compliance department, okay, did we get this? Did we get that? Did we get whatever? And we, fill out the form accordingly. So it's interesting as we look at that. So then I say, okay, so now you get down to, we're getting ready to close or whatnot. And when does it go from the compliance department to the closing department? Okay, because the closing department is what you're going to get when you get past underwriting and when you're going to actually get to let's order the loan docs. So compliance is going to take it through all of the processes up through and including underwriting, and then when we're ready to get it going, it's going to go to the closing department. The other part of the scenario is then going to, and which I think is going to be new. It'll be interesting to see again in a couple of weeks once we start closing deals, how many lenders are going to ship out, farm out the closing doc signed to the title company and have it be signed, and are they going to want to see it back? I suspect they will. They're going to want to get all the loan docs back to review by their closing department prior to releasing funds. And that's why there's the school of thought out there is that consummation, signing loan docs, and closing are going to be tough to be done on the same day, at least initially, until the lenders figure out, are we able to get, can I spread the liability out? Wait, am I adequately protected by the title company with the agreements that I've had from title to do this? And that's, let's just touch on that for a second. Lot of information recently out from the CFPB about, a lot of information about clarifying how sensitive I'm going to enforce the rules for the first couple of months. It's also interesting to see that a couple weeks ago, Congress, at least the House, passed a law to say, CFPB can't start enforcing TRID until the first part of February. Never came out of the Senate, and if it comes out of the Senate, according to reports, it's going to get vetoed by the president. So don't think that any of that has an impact on where we're going right now. It is interesting that, though, Director Cordray, who is the director of the CFPB, has indicated that as long as there's a good faith effort by the lender, that there won't be penalties early on in the transaction, in the enforcement aspect of it. I haven't heard a single lender that has said, "Oh, that's good. I feel so much better, and I'm sure that I don't have to follow the rules anymore." So I think again, we're going to be very cautious early on as we get these transactions through to closing. How are we doing on questions? I'm sorry. If that doesn't bring questions, I don't know what will.
We're doing okay, but we are coming close to being out of time.
Sure.
So do you want to do these scenarios, or do you want to hold off?
Yep. Nope, let's do the scenarios.
All right, let's go up to scenario number 1. Offer does not have a pre-qual attached. It's a 30-day escrow and simultaneous closings. So the listing agent dilemma. The first offer I get on a listing since the TRID CFPB laws went into effect, the 30-day close, contingent on buyer's home closing with simultaneous closing dates. And neither the pre-qual is on the new TRID pre-qual form. Both lenders say it'll work out and just leave it alone. The buyer's agent is trusting the lender. The realtor's response is, "Oh, I guess we'll just make it work." What should we do?
Again, I would have the heart-to-heart. If I'm the listing agent, I would have the heart-to-heart with the lender. Find out, how much work has been done by the lender in advance to comply with the rules. Again, the breakout of how much the LO is going to handle versus different parts of their department, and and just have that discussion and see. Initially, it is everybody operating in the dark. That's the unfortunate part, because there wasn't a trial period. And so can it happen? Yes, it can. In fact, I've talked to lenders that we have, in my office. I've asked specifically, is this going to happen? And they insist that they can get a 30-day deal done today, just like they were doing a month ago, and that it's going to be there's new rules, but their part of it is going to be handled in a timely manner and not add a huge delay to the process.
Okay, great. And then on to scenario number 2.
Yeah, I think I talked about this one already.
You pretty much covered it.
I did that one.
Yeah.
Let me touch on a couple of other things as we wrap up here. I think I'm in the wrap up.
Yep.
Okay. So I've heard some discussion about listing agent. Should I write in that the appraisal is going to be done during the inspection period, or that the buyer is going to pay for the appraisal during the inspection period? That's, in my opinion, a bad idea. Again, the contract is set up to be CFPB compliant. I know that we have a 10-day inspection period. That didn't get changed. Some instructors are saying, oh, we should always, on the buy side, we should always then extend the inspection period out to 20 days as the initial time period goes. Again, as a listing agent kind of guy, we can do that after 10 days. Mm-hmm. We can do that after 9 days. If the buyer is moving the loan process along in a timely manner, if I see that there's a diligent and good faith effort to getting the loan process handled. So handling it up front just tells me that the buyer is that intends to cause a delay, and I would be uncomfortable with that. Again, we kicked out the first LSU, so it's not until 10 days. The intent to proceed is, considerably down the road, depending on how the LE got delivered. And so I think that the 10 days for the inspection period is adequate at this point. Let the boilerplate play out and see if the buyer is moving accordingly. We've also seen discussions about increasing the earnest money or making earnest money hard. Bad idea. If it's a CFPB, if it's a TRID loan, I don't think that. I mean, let's wait and see what happens in the marketplace. Let's see where we're going with this. I don't think there's been considerable buyer favored changes to the purchase contract that now require everybody to put down 3% or 5% or 10% minimum, as far as earnest money is concerned. And I certainly don't, I'm not a fan of hard earnest money too early in the contract. In the event we've been in the contract and now the buyer's making some last minute changes, I get it at that point, it's appropriate at that point. But to start a transaction and to have a buyer and to make a buyer put up a couple $1,000 non-refundable, just sounds to me like you want to have a little heart-to-heart with the director of the CFPB, and I think that is going to cost people money negatively, if they're doing that. So I don't think that we're protecting our clients' interest. And I think those were the major ones. Oh, the other thing is that AAR's got excellent resources that are available online. We talked, Nick talked about the MLSConnect and going through that. Martha Apple and Scott Drucker did a wonderful webinar that's available. It's about 48 minutes talking about line-by-line changes of the purchase contract. And there, got the FAQs that Scott did. We've got a number of new links that we put up on the website. So I would certainly encourage you to do some browsing. And it's cool when AAR can post some updates on Facebook. In fact, Scott also found a tool about the delivery and the 3-day dates and how to calculate that, which is I think was either on the blog or on Facebook that got posted recently, the 3-day chart. And so for those of us that are challenged and have a difficult time figuring out how to count to 3 days, don't call Nick. don't call Nick, but we do have some resources for you there.
How would you define 3 full days?
On what document are we referring to?
Let's talk about
the purchase contract.
The purchase contract.
We got 3 different ways. We got the purchase contract, we got the LE, and as well as the CD. Any of those. So the purchase contract, that hasn't changed. The calculations for calendar days, it's the same a year ago as it is today. So if I'm having a closing that is closing on today, for example, the question is going to be when did I have to sign loan docs? And so today's Tuesday. Loan docs should have been signed by Friday. How did I get to Friday? 3 full days, Monday, Sunday, Saturday. Title companies typically aren't open on Saturday, so that means I better have signed them on Friday in order for me to be in compliance with the purchase contract and how it's stated. That's the old contract. There's a little trick involved with the new contract, but I think that answers your 3 full calendar days.
That's a good question. Okay. Short and concise answers.
Okay.
Okay. Can you speak to the premise of a buyer being able to rescind the mortgage after closing?
Rescind the mortgage after closing.
Mm-hmm.
Not sure. Let's see. If I were refinancing, there's a 3-day rescission period prior to getting a new loan, but I'm unaware of a rescission of a loan after closing. So the closest thing I would say that to rescission is going to be, the 3-day waiting period for a refi would be a rescission period. But when you think about that, I mean, you're rescinding from yourself. I mean, the contractual issue of a buyer and a seller, 2 different parties, to be able to rescind terms that you've been dealing with or talking about with the lender for the last 30 days, you're going to have a harmed party in the seller in the event it gets rescinded at the tail end. And then if it's already closed, I can tell you that lenders will be jumping through considerable hoops to make sure when the deal closes, it is not rescindable, that they've complied with the time periods, that they've complied with the all the CFPB regulations.
And if somebody wanted to read the TRID online on the CFPB's website,
Sure.
Do they go to CFPB, type it in?
Sure, CFPB.org is the government's website. They've got a number of tools that are there. In fact, they have a buyer toolkit. I believe it's a 25 or a 28 page explaining the process in actually very clear language. The other ones, the know before you owe, apply to the LE, the loan estimate, as well as the CD, the closing disclosure form, and those are available on the CFPB's website as well.
Thank you. Any closing remarks today, Jim?
I'm sorry I went more than an hour.
We'll blame it on Nick.
Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your questions.
You.
I think the next one is November 17th.
November 17th.
Also at noon, and we sign up accordingly.
Yep. No, actually, 1 registration for all 3.
Okay.
So if you signed up for this one, you're covered for the next 2. And if you did ask questions today that we didn't address, I will be forwarding your questions on to Jan Stewart in our risk management department here at AAR, and she has graciously agreed to take a look at them and get your questions answered.
And if you have more questions going forward, or questions for the November 17th TRID triggers and timelines, keep them coming, because it makes
Please.
We can certainly build a webinar, on the questions that we get in the meantime. So thank you all for attending, and I do appreciate your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nick, for being here today.
Thank you.
And thank you, Jim.
You're welcome.